They're glitching right now, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally watching their entire operating system crash because you just walked into the room and invalidated every lie they built their identity on. You know what's happening in their skull right now? Complete cognitive collapse. That thing they were so certain about, that pattern they bet their whole personality on, that formula they swore was universal law, that narrative they weaponized against everyone who dared to think differently, you just proved it was fiction, and they can't process it. Their brain is doing that thing computers do when you force them to divide by zero. Error, error, does not compute. Reality.exe has stopped responding. And the best part? You didn't even try. You didn't argue. You didn't debate. You didn't waste energy trying to convince them of anything. You simply existed in a way that made their entire worldview obsolete. You became the living contradiction to their carefully constructed delusion. Think about what that means for a second. These people built entire philosophies around why you couldn't succeed. They created elaborate theories about why certain things were impossible. They convinced themselves and everyone around them that the path you chose was guaranteed failure. They needed you to fail. They required it. Because your success meant their theories were worthless. Your victory meant their excuses were exposed. Your evolution meant they stayed stagnant by choice, not circumstance. So they watched. Oh, they watched closely. Waiting for you to stumble. Waiting for you to validate their predictions. Waiting for reality to conform to their comfortable little framework. And then you didn't. You succeeded in the exact way they said was impossible. You thrived in the environment they swore would destroy you. You broke through the ceiling. They declared unbreakable. Not because you're special, not because you're chosen, but because you simply refuse to accept their programming as your limitation. Now watch what happens to them. First comes the denial. They'll say it's luck, timing, privilege, anything but what it actually is. Proof that they were wrong. They'll scramble to find alternative explanations that protect their ego from the shattering truth that they could have done it too, but they chose comfort over growth. They chose validation over risk. They chose the safety of being right in theory over the danger of being proven wrong in practice. But denial only works for so long. Because you're still here, still succeeding, still breaking the patterns they swore were laws of nature. And every day you continue to exist outside their predicted failure, their denial becomes harder to maintain. The cognitive dissonance starts eating them alive from the inside. Their brain is literally fighting itself, trying to reconcile two incompatible realities. Reality 1, their worldview is correct. Their theories are sound. Their predictions are accurate. Reality 2, you. And you can't exist in their reality. You're the glitch in the matrix, the variable that breaks the equation, the evidence that their entire framework was built on sand. So their brain does what any overloaded system does. It crashes. Watch their eyes when they see you now. There's this micro expression that flashes across their face. It's not quite anger. It's not quite fear. It's something deeper. It's the look of someone watching their religion crumble in real time. The look of someone who just realized they've been praying to a false god and wasted years of their life defending something that never existed. You exposed the pattern, the invisible one, the one they believed in so deeply they never even questioned it, the one they used to judge everyone, the one they weaponized to keep people in line, the one they needed to be true so badly that they organized their entire personality around it. And you proved it was nothing. Here's where it gets psychological. They can't just accept they were wrong and move on. That's not how the human ego works. Admitting they were wrong about you means admitting they might be wrong about everything. It means confronting the possibility that all their limitations were self-imposed. It means accepting that they chose their cage and then spent years convincing themselves it was the only possible reality. That's too much. That's ego death. That's psychological annihilation. So instead, their brain creates a new narrative, a desperate one where you're still wrong somehow, where your success is actually failure in disguise, where you're going to crash eventually and they'll be proven right posthumously. They need this narrative like oxygen. Without it, they have to face what they actually are. People who chose fear and called it wisdom. But here's what they don't understand. You're not even in the same game anymore. While they're still trying to process what happened, you've already moved 3 levels beyond where they can perceive. You're not trying to prove them wrong. You're not seeking their validation. You're not waiting for their approval. You simply evolved past the point where their opinion has any gravitational pull on your reality. You broke their pattern, not by fighting it, not by arguing against it, but by transcending it so completely that it became irrelevant. Think about how much power that gives you. Every person who built their identity on that pattern is now forced to reckon with you. Your existence becomes a weapon you don't even have to wield. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to prove anything. You just keep living, keep succeeding, keep evolving, and their entire psychological infrastructure keeps crumbling. You're the evidence they can't explain away, the data point that breaks their model, the reality that invalidates their theory, and they hate it. They hate it so viscerally because it means confronting something they've spent their entire adult life avoiding, the possibility that they were the architect of their own limitations. Let me paint you a picture of what's happening in their world right now. They wake up and check your progress. They tell themselves they don't care, but they check anyway. They need to know. They need to see if you failed yet, if the universe has corrected what they perceive as a glitch, if reality has snapped back into the shape they're comfortable with. But you haven't failed. You're still there, still succeeding, still existing in a way that shouldn't be possible according to their framework. So they start rationalizing. Maybe you're lying, maybe it's fake, maybe it's not sustainable, maybe you're miserable behind the scenes. They create elaborate fantasies where you're actually suffering because they need you to be suffering. Your happiness breaks them more than your success, because success can be attributed to luck, but genuine fulfillment while breaking all their rules? That's unforgivable. They go to sleep thinking about you, not because they admire you, because you haunt them. You're the ghost of their unlived life, the physical manifestation of every risk they didn't take, every chance they let pass, every dream they killed with pragmatism and fear. You're not their enemy, you're their mirror. And they can't stand what they see reflected back. Now here's where most people would tell you to feel sorry for them, to have compassion, to understand that hurt people, and all that therapeutic nonsense. But I'm not most people. And neither are you, because feeling sorry for them requires pretending that their hatred of you is somehow your responsibility. It requires accepting that you should dim your light so they feel less uncomfortable with their darkness. It requires you to pause your evolution so they feel less bad about their stagnation. That's not compassion. That's enabling. That's allowing their ego to make demands on your reality. So no. You don't owe them comfort. You don't owe them explanations. You don't owe them a slower pace so they can catch up. You don't owe them anything except continued proof that their limitations were never universal laws, just personal choices they tried to franchise as truth. Keep breaking the pattern, not because you're trying to hurt them, not because you're trying to prove something, but because that's what evolution looks like. That's what growth demands. That's what happens when you stop asking permission from people who are terrified of change. You exposed something they needed to stay hidden. You revealed the emperor has no clothes. You showed everyone that the pattern they worshipped was just a collective agreement to stay small, dressed up as wisdom. And now you can't unring that bell. Every step forward you take echoes backward into their consciousness. Every victory you achieve is another crack in their carefully maintained delusion. Every moment you exist outside their predicted failure is another piece of evidence in the case against their worldview. You're not trying to destroy them, you're just refusing to participate in their mass delusion. But from their perspective, that's the same thing. Because their identity is so wrapped up in that pattern being true, that challenging it feels like a personal attack. Let them feel attacked. Let them experience the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. Let them wrestle with the possibility that they were wrong. Let them stay up at night trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. Let them exhaust themselves, creating narratives that protect their ego from the truth. That's not your problem to solve. Your job isn't to make them comfortable with your growth. Your job isn't to shrink so they feel adequate. Your job isn't to fail so they feel vindicated. Your job is to keep being the evidence that their pattern was never real. Because here's what happens when enough people see through the pattern. It stops being a pattern. It stops being treated as law. It stops having power over people's choices and dreams and ambitions. It gets downgraded from universal truth to personal opinion, from commandment to suggestion, from reality to just one possible interpretation that some people chose to accept. And that's when real change happens. Not when everyone agrees, not when everyone gets convinced through logic and reason, but when enough outliers exist that the pattern stops being enforceable, when enough people break through that the breakthrough becomes undeniable. You're not the first to expose this pattern, but you might be the one that breaks it for the people watching, the one whose success finally gives someone else permission to try, the one whose existence proves it's possible, even when everyone said it wasn't. That's not pressure, that's purpose. That's what happens when you stop playing by rules that were designed to keep you manageable. When you stop seeking approval from people who need you to fail. When you stop treating other people's fear as a valid reason to limit your own potential. You became dangerous the moment you realized their pattern was optional. Not dangerous in the sense of threatening harm. Dangerous in the sense that you can't be controlled by their usual mechanisms. You can't be guilt-tripped into staying small. You can't be shamed into accepting limitations. You can't be convinced that their comfort is more important than your evolution. You're dangerous because you're free. Free from their need for you to fail. Free from their requirement that you validate their choices by making the same ones. Free from their demand that you move at the speed of their courage. And freedom is contagious. That's what they're really afraid of. Not you specifically, but what you represent. The possibility that other people will see you and realize they've been living in a prison with unlocked doors, that they'll see you breaking patterns and wonder what other patterns are just collective agreements they can choose to exit. That your example will start an outbreak of people deciding their potential matters more than other people's comfort. You're not just succeeding, you're proving a point they needed to stay unproven. You're answering a question they needed to stay unanswered. You're living evidence of something they spent years arguing was impossible. And every day you continue to exist in this state, their argument gets weaker, their theory gets flimsier, their pattern gets more transparent, their control gets more tenuous, until one day, enough people break through that the pattern simply collapses. Not because anyone defeated it in debate, not because anyone convinced the believers they were wrong, but because it became irrelevant, because reality moved on without it. Because people stopped treating it as law and started treating it as the limiting belief it always was. You're watching this happen in real time. You're watching people who were so certain, suddenly uncertain. People who were so confident in their predictions, suddenly scrambling to explain why they were wrong. People who built entire platforms on that pattern being true, suddenly getting very quiet or very defensive. That's the sound of a worldview collapsing. That's what cognitive dissonance sounds like when it reaches critical mass. That's what happens when reality refuses to conform to someone's comfortable narrative. And you're the reason why. Not because you're special, not because you're chosen, not because you have some gift or advantage or privilege that makes you different, but because you simply refuse to let their pattern define your limits. You took the risk they wouldn't take. You made the attempt they were too afraid to make. You kept going when they would have quit. You evolved where they stayed static. You chose growth over comfort and uncertainty over security and possibility over predictability. And now their brain is in error mode because you exist. Now their whole framework is crashing because you're the variable that doesn't fit. Now their carefully maintained reality is falling apart because you're living proof that it was never reality at all, just a story they told themselves to justify staying small. So what do you do with this power? What do you do when you realize you've become the glitch in someone else's matrix? When you understand that your existence is causing psychological meltdowns in people who need you to fail? When you recognize that every step forward you take is another nail in the coffin of a worldview that hurt a lot of people by telling them their limitations were inevitable, you keep going. Not with malice, not with ego, not with some twisted satisfaction in their suffering, but with the understanding that your evolution serves a purpose bigger than their comfort, that your breakthrough creates permission for others, that your refusal to accept their pattern as law makes space for other people to question what patterns they've been following unconsciously. You owe them nothing except the continued proof that their limitations were never yours. You owe them nothing except the persistent reminder that patterns can be broken. You owe them nothing except the living evidence that their theories were always just theories, and reality is far more flexible than they wanted to believe. Keep hitting error mode in their brain. Keep being the data point that doesn't fit their model. Keep existing in ways they swore were impossible, not because you're trying to destroy them, but because you're trying to become yourself. And if their worldview can't survive contact with your authenticity, that's not your fault. That's just proof their worldview was never as solid as they pretended. You exposed the pattern they swore was invisible, the one they used as a weapon, the one they hid behind, the one they franchised as universal truth. And now everyone can see it for what it always was. Just another limitation disguised as wisdom. Just another cage painted to look like protection. Just another way people who chose fear tried to convince people choosing courage that they were being reckless. You're not reckless. You're awake. You're not lucky. You're aware. You're not special. You're free. And freedom always looks like chaos to people who've convinced themselves that their prison is paradise. Let them glitch. Let them crash. Let them reboot and try to run the same program again just to watch it fail one more time. You're not here to fix their system. You're here to prove their system is optional. And every day you exist outside their pattern, you do exactly that. So what's the weakest excuse you've used to stay inside someone else's pattern? What invisible rule have you been following that you never agreed to in the first place? Drop a full paragraph below. Tell me the pattern you're about to expose, or defend the one you think actually matters. Because if you can't articulate why you're following it, you're not following wisdom, you're following fear. And fear, dressed up as strategy, is still just fear. You know what you need to do now. You know what pattern you've been pretending is law when it's really just suggestion. You know what invisible rule you've been following because everyone else follows it, not because it actually serves you. Break it, expose it, become the glitch in their system. Hit error mode in the brain of everyone who needed that pattern to stay hidden so they could keep using it as an excuse. Because the world doesn't need more people following patterns. It needs more people exposing them, more people proving they're optional, more people existing in ways that make other people's limitations look like the choices they always were. Be that person. Not because I'm telling you to, but because you already know you're supposed to be. You felt it the moment you read this. That recognition, that knowing, that uncomfortable awareness that you've been playing by rules you never agreed to, following patterns you never questioned, accepting limitations that were never yours. You're done with that now. And everyone who needs those patterns to stay invisible, they're about to find out what error mode really feels like.